Okay, in this video, I'm going to review Heart of Darkness. This is from that paperback case, that infamous paperback case that I'm going to read all of. The case in question. Now with a giant gap that needs to be filled with 40 paperback novels that I will acquire. Oh, yes. But I got to tell you, I really liked this book. This was crazy good. I do think they put the stories in the wrong order in this. And a big reason for that is that, and I like both these pieces of writing. In different ways, I liked each one better than the other. Heart of Darkness was written in, I want to say, it was an 1899 story, published in 3 installments in what was called Blackwoods Magazine, some literary journal of the time. This is a 1950 paperback with an unattributed cover artist. I will maybe find that out at some point and do a little research. But 1950, this book's probably seen some life, been read a few times over the decades in different contexts. And now I'm having a little, a very minor book crisis. Which one do I keep? This one's in better shape. Looks like it's a later printing by just a little. This one I read, and it's got pencil markings for Heart of Darkness in the introduction, which I read, I think, 4 times over the course of this project. Very interesting. But The Secret Sharer is in some ways a more mature work with more mature themes and Conrad's most Conradian techniques, like that ambiguity that I talked about, and which other critics have noticed. I found out that Harold Bloom has written about it, his poetic ambiguity. I don't know if he said poetic, but ambiguity. And I noticed, that's a lot of time in between 2 different pieces of work. Heart of Darkness, based on something that had happened several years before, drawing from that, but it's so detailed. So 1899, and Secret Share wasn't written until 1909. So I think it's a little more mature in some ways. It's a little less showy and splashy and spacious and effortful. It's like a little more assured of itself. Like in Heart of Darkness, he repeats Heart of Darkness twice, that phrase. And I think the second one lands with a thud. It reminded me of that Simpsons parody of Little Women, where Mo, the bartender, is reading Little Women and it ends with, and they were all the little women, or whatever. But Secret Share just is more interesting to me thematically. I love the whole shadow self thing. I love the whole scene of the guy hanging on the side of the boat and being kept secret. But Heart of Darkness is incredible, and it's weird. It's so strange. Apparently, Conrad's short works were more experimental than his longer works, but I'm going to read Nostromo next, so I'll let you know. The back of Nostromo is effusive. It says, Conrad's best work and the work he liked most himself. So I'm like, well, I lucked into having a good other Conrad book on my case. But these are both great. And Heart of Darkness gives me the impression of, here's a piece of writing you could read over and over again, and it would be a total writing school. I have pieces of writing like that I just go back to again and again. They're wells. And I get so much out of them. I think I've mentioned when I read Holy the Firm 12 times in a year, and as many supporting texts and contextual texts as I could find. I got so much out of that. It was interesting. Arguably too much. Like, you're not supposed to look at nonfiction that close. Anyway, this Heart of Darkness is obviously another one. There are just so many good sentences in it. So which one do I keep? The one I marked up? And there's a couple of pages with tiny little rips on them that I need to tape up before they get worse. Or this nicer one. Why not both is what I would have said before. But, now I've got this whole case thing I want to keep eclectic. My friend Chris, who runs a fantastic sci-fi booktube channel that partly inspired this channel, called Liminal Spaces, all about sci-fi books, and who could talk about any books he wanted to if he wanted to. I know that guy's a Willa Cather scholar too, and knows a lot about writing. Anyway, he calls the copies of his that he keeps that are more worn his like reading copies, and I think that's kind of a good thing to do, especially with sci-fi, which has so much pulp, and some of those books are fragile and you know, printed once, and you love those old editions, but they can get worn down easily. You know, this is appropriate as The Secret Sharer is a doubles novel. Apparently, Poe has a influential early double story, William Wilson, I think it's called. And of course, Dostoevsky has the double, which I could go off about sometimes. And I think Kiln People is a cool sci-fi double story. I've got a couple of other books that this is connected to as well. One is called King Leopold's Ghost, and it's about Leopold II and his awful conquest of the Congo. And I just gotta find it. It's in here somewhere. And he was like one of the most genocidal freaks to ever exist. And but he's a big part of this. This is not. I mean, so like Chinua Achebe, who wrote Things Fall Apart, classic novel of Africa, I think 1958. He was very critical of this book from an African perspective, and there's room for that. I can see that. However, I think Conrad is very critical of the European presence in Africa in this book, and that's kind of the point of the book. It's a giant condemnation of the whole endeavor, just raiding this, you know, beautiful ancient continent and decimating its people for what? Ivory that was just constantly equated with death. You know, rotten ivory, buried ivory, fossil ivory, people's faces looking like pocked ivory. I mean, this is an evocative work. These two go great together. I do think they're in the wrong order. I mean, it's kind of weird to put someone's younger work before, or older work before their younger work. You know, like, wait, is that what he did? Yeah. Wait, no. Secret Share, no, it's the newer work and then the older work. I think the older work should be before the newer work, just chronologically, you know, so we can see influences and changes, and I just think thematically it might have worked more. Also, so Heart of Darkness ends in sickness, and apparently Conrad, when he found himself as a steamboat captain on the Congo River going into the Congo, he had 8 million health problems from it, and you know, and it was never really the same after it. And that's what happens in this. So it's about, I mean, it's such an interestingly structured work. God, I really could go off on this, and I'm worried I'm going to go off too much. But so it's about, you know, they're going upriver on the steamboat. They're in the Congo. Everything is described so well. I mean, it's just masterful. It's amazing. I mean, everyone wants to consider it a novel or a short novel or a novella because it's just so good, even though it's, I think I heard it's 30,000 words. That's not very long. If The Great Gatsby is 50,000 words, according to NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month that counts these things. Yeah, it's so packed. Let's see if I can let me share some good lines. But anyway, it really is a challenge to Europe's myths about itself. It's a pretty scathing indictment, and nobody comes out of it, you know, uncondemned. That guy doesn't really look like Conrad, so who is that? That must be Kurtz, the antagonist of Heart of Darkness. That's my guess. Correct me, someone, if I'm wrong. But I love that vivid green and blue. That's so nice. So they're all it's just all approach and setup and evasiveness. They're heading upriver to get this guy that has just really gone wild in his role as a colonist gathering ivory for this company in the far reaches of this jungle. And even when they get to the guy, and the thoughts are so good. I mean, the story is just so good. It's like even as the tension is built, approaching this person that's gone totally wild and now lives in a hut with heads around it on spikes, like a jungle of Vlad the Impaler. Even then, it's kind of evasive, and it dodges and weaves around this figure. Maybe the moment is there, but I didn't catch it, and I looked for it. That, like, so Apocalypse Now is based on Heart of Darkness, right? And maybe one of the most stunning moments in Apocalypse Now is when people stay loyal to Kurtz out in the jungle at a moment when you think they're all going to rise up against him. This guy that is like very charismatic somehow and talented in some ways. Like he can paint and write. Maybe, no, he doesn't write well, but he can do other things. And what happens? Yeah, and it's really a stunning, jaw-dropping moment in the movie, I remember. And I'm not sure that I saw the equivalent in the book here. But what's a stronger scene is afterward, where the narrator, Marlowe, this guy telling this story in Heart of Darkness, on a boat. Yeah, oh yeah, the whole story is like recounted on a boat trip coming back after all this, I think. Or much of it anyway. But there's a scene afterward where, let me think about this. Where he's talking to a woman who was in Kurtz's life before, and it's a really fascinating scene. Reminded me of Emma a little bit, just like this really heightened social scene. Crazy stuff. The sea and the sky were welded together without a joint. The conquest of the earth, which mostly means the taking it away from those who have a different complexion or slightly flatter noses than ourselves, is not a pretty thing when you look into it too much. Yeah, I mean, he was like, pretty thoughtful for his time. I can see Achibe's criticism of Conrad, but I also think it is kind of missing the point. This is a condemnation of European behavior. Kurtz is like defined as the product of all of Europe. You get his backstory, his family history. Watching a coast as it slips by the ship is like thinking about an enigma. There it is before you, smiling, frowning, inviting, grand, mean, insipid, or savage, and always mute with an air of whispering, come and find out. Well, here's something I loved. The sun was low, and leaning forward side by side, they seemed to be tugging painfully uphill their two ridiculous shadows of unequal length that trailed behind them slowly over the tall grass without bending a single blade. Oh man, that's so awesome. And this stillness of life did not in the least resemble a peace. It was the stillness of an implacable force brooding over an inscrutable intention. It looked at you with a vengeful aspect. I got used to it afterwards. I did not see it anymore. I had no time. The voice of the surf, heard now and then, was a positive pleasure like the speech of a brother. It was something natural that had its reason, that had a meaning. No use telling you much about that. Paths everywhere. Stamped-in network of paths spreading over the empty land, through the long grass, through burnt grass, through thickets, down and up chilly ravines, up and down stony hills ablaze with heat. And a solitude, nobody, not a hut. Here's an example of that comma clarity thing I was talking about. He forgoes a comma right there, and it all gets stronger, but it also gets more poetically ambiguous and dense, just a little bit. One ship is very much like another, and the sea is always the same. In the immutability of their surroundings, the foreign shores, the foreign faces, the changing immensity of life glide past, veiled not by a sense of mystery, but by a slightly disdainful ignorance. For there is nothing mysterious to seaman unless it be the sea itself, which is the mistress of his existence and as inscrutable as destiny. Like, without that comma, their surroundings and the foreign shores are conflated and made closer, and it's interesting. There's something to think about there. Like, he renames some banal named organization, like Advancement of Exploration or something, the International Society for the Suppression of Savage Customs. I mean, that to me really highlights the satirical, critical aspect of this book. I mean, this book is a writing school. I see why this frequently makes best 100 American books list. Not American, modern books lists. It's modern-ish. Smiles and frowns chasing each other over that open countenance like sunshine and shadow on a windswept plain. I'm like, that's a great description of someone's face and of a windswept plain. What? You're amazing. Oh, this has definitely happened to me. I mean, not to where I was killing people or doing genocides, but the wilderness had found him out early and had taken on him a terrible vengeance for the fantastic invasion. I think it had whispered to him things about himself which he did not know, things of which he had no conception until he took counsel with this great solitude, and the whisper had proved irresistibly fascinating. Shoes figure into this really interestingly. Characters are always thinking about their shoes. I did a little bit of extra research, and a lot of critics equate them with civilized identity, and I think that makes sense. So, somewhat, our narrators, our storytellers, shoes get blood on them, so he throws them out, and then in a scene not long after that, he gives somebody else a pair of shoes that's leaving the area. You need some new shoes. It's fascinating. It's just really well written. Oh, I love this. The dusk was falling. I had to wait in a lofty drawing room with 3 long windows from floor to ceiling that were like 3 luminous and bedraped columns. That's such a cool description of windows. Just these 3 luminous columns of light. The curtains reduced to the drapes of the columns. That's cool. This is a brilliant book. I love this book. We'll definitely be rereading, 100%. And I'm now a defender of Conrad. I'm like, this guy's great. He's a really good writer. I can't wait to read Nostromo. I bet it's going to be awesome. It's longer than this. And, I bet it'll be good. It's about a revolution, I hear.